Let's talk a little bit about JD Vance, the vice president, former senator from Ohio, author of Hillbilly Elegy, and someone I've described in the past as a miserable little pig man given his willingness to believe whatever it takes to get him ahead. Now, longtime viewers, longtime readers know that I'm no fan of the vice president. I do think that as far as political figures go, he is genuinely despicable. Consider during the election his decision to slander the Haitian community of Springfield and then admit to lying about this for political gain. Genuinely despicable. Those were his constituents, and not worthy, in my view, of your respect. But this is not going to be my usual rehashing of all the reasons I dislike JD Vance. Here we're going to talk about his current political position because it is interesting, and by interesting I mean he seems to have driven straight into a ditch. Now, you may have noticed over the past couple of weeks that Vance has been kind of at the forefront of American foreign policy. Last week, he traveled to Hungary to greet Viktor Orban and campaign for Orban's re-election. Orban is at the forefront of a kind of authoritarian fascist international, and Vance very much sees himself a part of that, a part of some kind of defense, as he says, of Western civilization. Now, for my part, these are just a bunch of halfway crooks, squalid little men who have no grand vision other than to steal from the people they purport to lead and demonize the people that they hate. But Vance was there campaigning for them, a direct emissary from the President of the United States. And after that, Vance took the lead in negotiations with Tehran, trying to find some kind of ceasefire to bring the war with Iran to a close. A war, mind you, that Donald Trump started, a war that in the best case will result in more or less a worse version of the status quo ante, with Iran having achieved something of a strategic victory over the United States. General disaster. And in the wake of his visit to Hungary ahead of these negotiations, Vance managed to create a lot of really good publicity for himself. He had successfully sold himself as being against the war to begin with, and now he is the peacemaker coming to essentially fix the president's mistake. And you can see how for Vance this was going to be a setup for him to emerge as a great statesman. Someone who will be deserving of the mantle of president in a couple years. Now, there are a couple factual problems here. The first is that Vance, not against the war, not even meaningfully anti-war. Vance has been supportive of our murderous boat strikes in the Caribbean. He supported the strike in Iran last year. He supported the actions against Venezuela. He has humored the president's saber-rattling against Greenland and would almost certainly support an effort to seize Greenland by force from Denmark. He's on board with our saber-rattling against Cuba. He was very much on board with the Venezuela attack. And he had counseled the president with Iran to hit hard or not do it at all. That doesn't seem like someone who is anti-war. That seems like someone who is opportunistic, who will take the position he needs to take in order to get ahead, to stay in the president's good graces. And as I've argued very often, this opportunism is characteristic of JD Vance. This is who he is. Remember, this was a guy who said back in 2015, 2016 that he was a never Trump guy, who once even described Trump as being America's Hitler, which, for what it's worth, maybe not wrong about that, and then reinvented himself as MAGA's strongest soldier in order to get in Trump's good graces and position himself as a potential vice president, which he successfully did. So, I mean, good for him. He has at least the political instincts to be able to navigate this world and set himself up for some kind of political success. But you have to remember a few things. The first is that Vance has never actually won a truly competitive election. He's won one election. This was the Ohio Senate race in 2022. He actually underperformed the rest of the Republican ticket by several points and was pretty much brought over the line by Donald Trump. Vice presidents don't really make a difference one way or another in presidential elections, so we'll give that one to Trump. And since then, he's never really had to prove himself politically. And this was his moment to prove himself politically, to demonstrate again his capacity to be a great statesman. And what happened? Well, after 20 hours of negotiations, described in some places as a marathon, but those are not marathon negotiations. The negotiations to produce the Iran deal under Obama were the product of years of discussion. That's a marathon. Vance gave it the better part of a day and then called it quits. Tehran wasn't going to take whatever maximalist deal he was putting forth, wasn't going to let the administration save face in the best way possible, And then he quit, said, oh, we can't get a deal. Now, if you know anything about the vice presidency as an office that doesn't have very many well-defined duties, and for most of its history was considered barely a prize, something simply to be a stepping stone to the presidency. Some vice presidents here and there maybe tried to carve out their own duties, but for the most part, it was a holding pen. That's how Lyndon Johnson saw it, for example. That's how George H.W. Bush saw it when he was vice president to Reagan. The more modern vice presidency, exemplified, I'd say, by Al Gore, actually, was much more active, having a set portfolio of issues and trying to pursue them. Dick Cheney was also a very active, very powerful vice president, exercising, in some regard, real executive authority. But those are exceptions. For the most part, presidents treat their vice presidents as something between the most junior partner possible and something of a nuisance, almost. That's, I'd say, how Joe Biden saw Kamala Harris. It's how Donald Trump saw Mike Pence. Occasionally, though, you get a president who actively dislikes their vice president, doesn't trust them as far as they can throw them, and that is how I see the relationship between Vance and Trump. Vance is a loyal soldier. Of course, he has no real other option. But Trump clearly isn't so certain about the guy and will often assign him, for lack of a better term, the shit work of the administration. After immigration agents killed Rene Good and Alex Preddy, it was Vance who was sent out to defend the White House and defend its immigration policies. Eating shit for the president. And I think you should see his Iran negotiations as eating shit for the president. It is noteworthy that while Vance was out trying to cut some sort of deal and an arrangement that was just not going to work out for him, Trump was with Marco Rubio, someone he seems to actually like, at a UFC event in Miami. If anything should tell you about the relative position of those two men with regards to the president, it is that juxtaposition. I'll do an aside here. It's wild that Vance was considered to be appropriate for these negotiations whatsoever. In addition to having very little political experience, he has no kind of experience doing negotiations. He's never led an organization. He's never acted as a negotiator. He was not a long-time legislator. He doesn't have some signature piece of legislation to his name that would suggest detailed negotiations. He is really the most unqualified person for that job, and arguably one of the most unqualified people to ever serve as vice president. Anyway, to wrap back around to the point of this, Iran talks failed. And then, just on Sunday, Viktor Orban lost in a landslide to Peter Magyar. I think I'm saying that right. The leader of the Hungarian opposition and incoming Prime Minister of Hungary, who has the political power and mandate and authority to essentially reverse all of Orbanism. Now, is Vance responsible for that defeat? No. 16 years of hard work by the people of Hungary, of dedicated opposition, is responsible for that. But does it look really bad for JD Vance that after going to campaign for Orban suffers a humiliating defeat? Yeah, it does. And the past week, I think, represents a humiliation for JD Vance. Clear indication that all of his maneuvering, all of his scheming is for naught. That he's not as skilled as he thinks he is. And that his attempts to position himself as the heir apparent to Donald Trump are probably going to be for naught. I won't count him out entirely, but it is hard to recover from this kind of high-profile humiliation. His great asset, though, is that the press seems to like him, seems to buy what he is selling in terms of his own self-image. And again, he is among the most unprincipled people in American politics. And being unprincipled, being shameless, as Donald Trump will tell you, can take you very, very far. Thank you, as always, for watching. If you like this video, please consider this one and consider giving the page a subscribe. Help me beat the algorithm, and if nothing else, join the little community we're building here over at Takes. Trademark, not really. See you next time.